the biggest, I think, mistake that companies then make is, okay, let's just do all channels, multiply, which I think increases the problem.
Welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast, where experts discuss international content management, product localization, and global expansion. I'm Caterina from Undertow. We create and manage localization programs for B2B SaaS companies so they can grow globally. Today, our founder Nicola will be talking with Merel, CEO and CPO at Wyzetalk. Together, they will explore the difference between buyers, admins, and end users in B2B SaaS, how these roles influence product strategy, and how teams decide what to focus on, and why putting frontline workers at the center is essential for driving adoption, ensuring safety, and building products that deliver real long-term value for both employees and businesses. If you're a founder, CPO, or localization leader, this episode will give you practical insights on how to tailor your strategy for different personas and design localization programs that drive adoption, reduce friction, and scale across markets. So, without further ado, let's dive in.
Hi, Merel, and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. And today we're going to talk about, the topic is going to be mainly about like the difference between buyers, end users, how that impacts the product development and the, let's say, user acceptance rates as well. But before we jump into today's topic, would you mind telling us a bit about yourself and Wyzetalk?
Of course. As I said, my name is Merel. I'm the CEO at Wyzetalk. I have a dual role. I'm both Chief Executive Officer, but also Chief Product. That's also how I started. So it's a very nice view on leading the company from a more product-led perspective. Wyzetalk is a company that builds frontline platforms, making frontline workers or giving them access and digital access point to any information that might improve either their workplace or their work during their days.
And as you say, you work with frontline workers around the world. So what's been the most surprising thing you've learned about creating digital tools that actually work for people in different cultures and different work environments?
It sounds like a very big task, right? And not an easy solve. I think that the majority of the obstacles are actually technical and not so much cultural or anywhere else. Every person, and yes, there are nuances, but every person has a specific set of needs. You can look at it as Maslow's pyramid as well, right? There is a foundation that everyone needs to go through their day, their tasks, or their life in a healthy way. And those needs are quite similar across the world. That has to do with certainty, confidence, trust, and then building outwards to higher needs once those first basic needs are met. In that sense, the main obstacle that we've had with our product was how do we actually reach those frontline workers who do not yet have digital access? And it's a bit of a brain breaker. I very often have people ask me, but why? You can just reach them on email. And I said, but they don't have a corporate email address. And to the majority of people working in an office, that sounds bizarre. They can hardly imagine. Everyone has, 20 subscriptions to everything. And these workers don't have access to anything at all. If they want to ask for leave, they'll have to submit a paper form, stand in a queue, might take days before they get an answer, might not get an answer at all on time. So they don't know whether they can or cannot take leave. Getting information on what is the safest way to perform a task, all on paper, on notice boards. And I think that makes life a lot more difficult as a frontline worker. So our mission and purpose was to overcome that obstacle, making sure that they have digital access, even though they do not have an email address. And luckily for us, everyone seems to be having a smartphone these days. We've actually seen quite a jump from 64% penetration a few years back to 94% of frontline workers having smartphones. That makes it a lot easier for us to include them and reach them.
So with so many frontline workers out there, like how can you make a product that feels both universal that in a way works everywhere, and at the same time it's still like personal to each unique workplace, so they have different dynamics. Is there a way like you recommend to try to find the balance there?
Yeah. So there is a core that is similar for everyone. And it sounds difficult, but it's actually not. But it does depend on who you view as your main user. I think that's very important because there is a difference between someone who buys a product, someone who implements a product, and someone who is an actual daily user of that product. So when you look at frontline workers and workers in any sense, needs are very much the same. That also means that the core functionality that you offer, as well as the core user experience of what you offer, can very much be the same. Where it differs is the type, in our case, because we are a platform that allows for content communication as well, where it differs is what kind of content you disclose. But the actual user experience of it, how they navigate in overall shape, want to see, remains the same. I mean, why is TikTok such a big trend globally? Because it addresses a need that everyone has, or a desire to view or see something. And that works very much the same with our product. Where it differs per workplace is in two parts. One is the actual branding of the thing. It acts and moves and feels as though it is an app from your employer. That's the intent. It feels like home in that sense. And the second aspect of it is that whatever software a workplace already has that is available to office workers can be integrated into our platform. So it opens up access, digital access for the frontline workers in that sense. That's where it's customized. All the other aspects of it are based on the needs of the end users, very much. What it looks like is very much dependent on what the company looks like, their culture, etc.
Here comes the other, I think, balance that it might be tough to navigate, because in enterprise tech, as you said, you have the people buying are not the software product, are not the one using it every day, but you cannot need to have both love the product, because if the buyer loves it, but the end user hates it, it's not going to have a long life in that company. And the other way around, if the buyer is not satisfied, it's never going to reach the end user. So how do you strike a balance there to make it both love it?
Yeah, well, it's been trial and error, of course, over the last 20 years. And in what I've noticed as a pattern is that you really need to dive deeper into drivers for each of the buyer types that you have, as well as the user types that you have. So in our case, and I think in the majority of cases, it's a higher level C-suite that is the actual end buyer of your product. Specifically, if it's a solution or a platform that touches every employee, then the actual yes or no, the buying will be done at a very high level. And understanding what their needs are and where they see risks is something that you need to incorporate in your solution, both in the design, but also in what you deliver, so the output of it. That is something vastly different, in our case, to our end user. So let's say a CEO or a CFO is our buyer. That is someone for whom the bottom line is extremely important. They do not want to run any risks with the company in terms of compliance, etc. And reputation in that sense is also very important. And you need to take that in. That means that with our product, we need to prove that what we're doing does not pose a risk on the one hand, and on the other hand, delivers information and outcomes that will directly or indirectly impact the bottom line of a company. It's a plus that in our case, since we allow for a news feed with news to be shared, that it also allows for this CEO, CFO, CMO, whoever it is, to be in connection and in contact with their employees by sharing news, a video of themselves, explaining what the goals for the new year are, for instance. So it brings a closeness that might not be directly measurable, but will definitely have an impact. So that's for our buyer. Our users, we have two types. One are the super users, who are the ones who release information on the platform, who make choices for what integrations or what functionality will be available. They're daily users in the sense that they determine how the platform is built up. They have the same problems with risk and reputation, And they want a frictionless experience because they use it more often. That means that it needs to work seamlessly, and you have to take that into account as limited time as possible for tasks that they have to perform. Non-complexity, well, it might be complex, but they don't want to see that at all. So to make it as easy as possible. And then we have our end users, and in our case, the frontline workers, our daily users. They also perceive a risk, but their risk is not so much in using the platform. Their risk is in, do I get home safe every day? That's their motive. And I think that is one of the most important reasons for us in our platform to focus not just on operational information or information news from the business as a company or social interaction, which it all can do, but we also very much focus on emergency alerts, safety procedures and updates, making sure that employees understand how they can move through their day safely and efficiently and come home alive at the end of it.
And can you tell us maybe a story or an example of where you've seen firsthand the impact of the difference between buyers and users, like maybe a feature that was developed like differently because of this way of seeing things or something else?
Yes. So interesting. Well, there are multiple, of course, right? And one of the things that happens is data requests. So everyone, when you buy something, you want to understand what the value of it is that you have bought or what you've done. You can maybe even relate it to LinkedIn, right? If you post something on LinkedIn, both of us are users, I suspect, Nicola, then at some point you are tracking who's viewing it, how many likes you get it, or something. Same with anyone who's on Instagram or on TikTok. And what we noticed is that there was a very high need for publishers on our platforms to understand, okay, which employees are seeing this, what are they doing with it, because it addressed two of their needs. One is what I am doing successful. Is it being read? Is it being seen? And secondly, is there an impact? Are they actually doing something with it? The request that popped in continuously was, is it being seen? Is it being seen? And we cater to that, of course, in our dashboard. But the more interesting question for us, also related to the frontline worker, is not just, is it seen, but is it being acted upon? And that's why we implemented an additional type of functionality towards the majority of things that we do, and that is acknowledgement. For instance, acknowledgement of having seen, read, and complying with a new safety procedure, so that the employer is aware that everyone has seen a change and will live by that change, and they can actually, as an employer, also act on that going forward. But same for the frontline worker. So I think that is one example where we worked. And I have multiple examples also from previous companies where I worked for. What you typically see is that the admin user or the buyer has the loudest voice when they want something. And that is difficult in product development because the loudest voice is something that the majority of people tend to jump onto, especially if that is a voice of power in position of power. And then you really need to dive into the argumentation and the impact, the end result of what it is that they're asking for and you potentially would deliver. If it only touches 1 to 5% of its users and has less impact for the other 95 to 99, then you really need to scratch yourself behind the ears and think, does it make sense? So for us, what we do is we base it on impact levels. Who is it for? How big is this audience? But also, what impact does it have on preferably all three groups, buyer, admin user, and end user, before we make a decision on whether we move forward or not.
Sorry to interrupt your listening, but do you want to grow your B2B SaaS in international markets? Because every country is different, and what users value in one market doesn't necessarily matter in another one. At Undertow, we help B2B SaaS companies like yours succeed in their international expansion. We create customized localization strategies that address the unique challenges of each market. In this way, you can effectively attract, engage, and convert customers worldwide. Visit undertowlanguages.com to find out more. And now back to the show. Yeah, you anticipated me a bit. I wanted to ask you actually if you have like a framework or something, and it sounds like it's something you already have like structure to make a decision like when to move forward and when
Yes.
not.
Yes. And I mean, we feel that the majority of choices and impact should lie with the end users. They're your daily users, and they use it in what we believe as a source of information that is crucial to them and essential. So we release features, we develop, and we advise our clients on adding that to their platform above anything else. But naturally, someone who works with the system on the daily, like an admin or a super user, also wants to have a nice day with a frictionless experience and being able to do a part of their task in our system as easily as possible. And then you have the buyer. Never forget that, because that's the person who will, in the end, decide, shall we or shall we not continue with this? And value needs to be seen and important. But if you would relate that, I think in a schema, for us, it's 70% of our effort goes to our daily end users, 20% goes to the super admins, and 10% goes to impactful value, visible value for our buyers, even if they are never in the system.
And the other thing I want to ask you is actually like metrics. If you kind of look at different metrics or split the metrics in a different way to like keep an eye on the different kind of users and buyers.
Yes, we do. And I must say buyer metrics are more difficult because very often they don't ever enter your system. And that what we then do is, and I think that data insights is a good example there. So the insights that we deliver is something that our super admins are actively involved in, and they track that very often, at least once a week, and very often more. And they gain a lot of insight into how their platform is being used, what is being seen, whether people have or have not done a specific training, whether payslips are being accessed, etc. But the buyers who actually bought this platform to cater for a solution, they haven't. They don't have, well, they have access to the dashboard, but they very often don't go in. We are then reliant on the super admins to share that information for the buyer to see whether it's impactful or not. And that doesn't always happen, not because super admins don't want to share, but it's simply maybe not the first thing on their mind, they forget, etc. So what you can then do is release email reports to the buyers, making sure that they get a monthly view on what's happening and what's successful in their platform so that you share the value with them continuously.
And what do you think, like, what's the, let's say, the biggest mistakes they see leaders making when they try to create communication tools for diverse workforce?
Well, I think communication is a problem everywhere. I'm not sure whether you agree, Nicola, but I mean, we have over fatigue, right? We have communication fatigue. There are just too many channels for us. I mean, with some of my suppliers, I'm on Slack. With my company, I'm on Teams. You have email, phone calls, WhatsApps, and a whole host of other stuff. And most companies have an intranet. So there's a lot of channels of information for us as office workers, knowledge workers, and that poses a problem for the majority of companies. I used to work at a factory and we did surveys for companies on engagement, satisfaction, etc. Communication was always in the top 3 of problems, as brought forward by the employees themselves, right? So it's an employee-based survey. They always hit communication as a point for improvement, and it was very often in the top 3, if not always. I'd say always.
Is it because they didn't get the information they wanted, or it's like it was scattered across too many channels, so they will miss it, or because maybe of information overload? Or
I think it's a combination of things. For some, it was overload, both in terms of content as well and information as well as channels. For others, it was no information at all in that context. I must say that was heavily based on office-based companies. If you now look at a more diverse, because that's add complexity to the whole, right? So this is already a problem for people who are well connected, both digitally in an office, speaking to people every day. And if you then add to that mix a group of people who are not digitally connected, typically do not have access and rely on either a notice board or word by mouth from a manager on information, then communication becomes an even bigger headache and a bigger obstacle or bottleneck for a company. So yes, for a diverse group, even amongst office personnel, communication can already be tricky because you don't know whether the channel you're using is the channel that they would actually prefer. The biggest, I think, mistake that companies then make is, okay, let's just do all channels, multiply, which I think increases the problem. And then we have companies who don't have a means of reaching people anyhow. They also try different means, notice boards, paper handouts, sometimes an SMS, if they have phone numbers, but you're never sure who will get it or not, and just information coming through layers of managers down to the work floor. The biggest problem with that is the potential of fake news, and not intentional fake news, not fake news as we see, although it might, as we see on X and Instagram, etc., but things just being translated in the wrong way through conversations, through someone not getting the right context, etc. And that causes, I think, a very low level of knowledge, very often a lot of confusion, and that has an impact on both the productivity of teams and their trust in leadership.
Yeah, and I guess like when it coming down through layers, it might even be that the thing that was like the main focus of the original message is not the main focus of the final message. Yeah, things obviously gets shifted when passed from person to person.
Yeah, I don't know what's the word for that. The by telephone thing?
Well, yeah, we got the game in Italy, so like that you whisper in somebody's ear and then they whisper to the next one and he gets out of like a, I can't remember the name in English. Yeah.
I think, you have that movie, right? Lost in Translation. And I think that applies. Literal, not just from one language to the next, but lost in translating from person to person.
Yeah. And before we wrap up, like, do you have any last piece of advice for SaaS founders, just in general, or about if you have something more about communication, obviously, or like when choosing what to do, what to leave, especially when you're like, you're setting what features to focus on or what?
Yeah. Well, in terms of communication, of course, communication is difficult, right? It seems easy. We can all connect and have a conversation, etc. But communication at scale can be very difficult. And I noticed that a lot of SaaS founders and SaaS companies try to be authentic, which is good. You should always be authentic. But in that, they don't always follow a pattern or a framework for communication. And that can also lead, unfortunately, to having to retract later on or pushing out information too early or too late because they want to be diligent. So my recommendation would be is anticipate that you'll have to communicate. Anticipate a variety of situations in which you'll have to communicate and write down what the steps of communication will then be. If you're 5 people, not so much of a problem. As soon as you grow beyond 10, 15, 20, you'll really start to have clarity and one message to everyone in every situation, whether that's an urgent situation, a mistake that needs to be solved, good news to share, etc. That's typically the easiest one, good news, but then still. So get a framework out there. Make sure that leadership communicates with one voice and with one message so that people do not get confused or distrustful. That's on communication. I think in general sense for SaaS, there are so many companies, tech initiatives, entrepreneurs who are using tech to bring something to the world. I'm not sure whether it's a recommendation, but it would be my hope, I think, that more of that energy is spent on tech that actually improves people and the world and not just makes money.
I think it's a really nice closing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
You're very welcome, Nicola. Have a lovely day.
You too.
Thanks for joining us today. The Multilingual Content Podcast is powered by Undertow. We help B2B SaaS companies grow in any language. Get in touch if you want to know more. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episode. If you want to support us, remember to give 5 stars to the podcast. See you next time.